which includes cooperation with the Iraqi security forces, continues at the invitation of the government of Iraq to advise, assist, and enable them. The Great Seal of the United States, which you can see here on the wallpaper around this chamber, was created early in our nation's history, and it shows an eagle holding 13 arrows in one talon, those 13 to represent the first 13 American states, and an olive branch in the other talon. The design was chosen very intentionally. The arrows signify the United States' military capacity, might, and will. The olive branch signifies the American desire to be a peacemaking, diplomatic nation. On the seal of the United States, the eagle is facing toward the olive branch. Facing toward the olive branch because we want everyone to know how we define ourselves as a nation that, yes, we will have the military capacity to defeat enemies if we must. But as a nation, our preference permanently and always is to seek peace and diplomatic solutions with all the nations of the world. After 20 years, it's time to repeal the Iraq war authorizations. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this procedural vote today. It will begin a robust and fulsome debate that will go into next week. Senator Young and I and our colleagues are committed that that debate shall include opportunities for members to offer amendments. That is being worked on by Democratic and Republican leadership. We haven't had a discussion of this kind for nearly 6 decades. It's good that we're going to give it the time and attention it deserves, and I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the cloture motion later this morning. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
From New Jersey.
I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
No objection.
Mr. President, as senators, our gravest responsibility is to use, I should say, authorize the use of military force, because that is a decision about life and death, It's a decision about sending our sons and daughters into harm's way. More than 20 years ago, we voted on whether to authorize the use of military force against Iraq. Decades later, we have a chance to formally end that war and claw back an outdated authority. When authorizations for military force have outlived the purpose that Congress intended, we should repeal them. We should repeal them to ensure that Congress determines when to send Americans into harm's way, so that our laws reflect current threats and protect U.S. interests, and to guard against future executive abuse. Now, it's taken a long time to get here. I want to commend Senator Kaine and Young, two esteemed members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee who have been pursuing repeal of the 1991 and 2002 AUMFs against Iraq for years. And I applaud their relentless focus on this issue. As we mark the 20th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, we cannot ignore its heavy toll. It destabilized the Middle East. It empowered Iran. It turned al-Qaeda into a regional franchise. By some estimates, it killed more than 500,000 Iraqis. It was a war our partners in the region did not support, and it damaged American leadership on the global stage. But most gravely, it cost our nation nearly 5,000 lives. Americans who fought bravely and served their nation, didn't ask the question whether it's right or wrong, just answered the call. Now, I'm proud to have voted against going to war with Iraq in 2002 when I served in the House. I believe history has proven that was the right call. But that is not the question before us today. The Iraq of 2023 is far different than the Iraq of 2003. Today, Iraq is a critical strategic partner. We fight ISIS together. We protect American personnel and American assets together. This relationship also goes far beyond security. We are partnering on health, education, and climate change. We're working to stabilize global energy markets together. Repealing these outdated authorizations would cement this important relationship with serious bilateral diplomacy. It will help Iraq chart a course for the future that is independent and more closely integrated with its Arab neighbors. It also removes a major Iranian talking point, however false, that the United States is a colonial power in Iraq. Now, there are real threats in this part of the world. We must be clear-eyed about those. But the answer to those threats is not the 1991 or 2002 AUMF. Now, I know when we get to amendments, my colleagues will offer amendments to this bill. They will try to delay repeal. They will argue we need these authorizations to respond to Iranian-led and Iranian-backed attacks. They may even offer amendments to expand these authorizations and give the president even broader authority. But I urge my colleagues to remember this. The president is clear in his view that he has the authority under the 2001 AUMF and the Constitution for defensive military operations against ISIS or Iranian threats against U.S. personnel and interests. In fact, the president has responded to Iranian-led and Iranian-backed attacks repeatedly and has done so without relying on the 2002 AUMF. Now, take it from me, as someone who has worked for decades to confront the challenge of Iran, I know well the threat that Iran poses to us and to our allies in the region. We cannot be naive about their intentions, and we need to have the political will to respond how and when we deem necessary. But repeal will have no impact on our ability to defend U.S. interests against Iran. None whatsoever. After 20 years, this is a defining moment. Congress needs to repeal these authorizations for the use of military force to reassert our constitutional role on war powers. We should not just declare wars, we need to be able to end them as well. And let's be clear, this is not some theoretical debate. This is about the lives of our servicemen and women who may be called upon to fight and make the ultimate sacrifice. In our democracy, those decisions must be made by Congress. So I'm proud that we're stepping up to have the difficult debates that we should have, and I look forward to passing this bill with a strong bipartisan vote as it passed out of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which has jurisdiction over the authorizations of uses of military force. That bipartisan vote there, I think, will be reflected in a bipartisan vote in the House. I urge my colleagues to vote to repeal these authorizations, and in the first instance to start by doing so by voting to have cloture. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that Joshua Kretman, a detailee from the State Department to the Foreign Relations Committee, be granted floor privileges for the duration of the 118th Congress.
Without objection.
And I yield the floor.
The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the nomination of Executive Calendar Number 27, Jessica G.L. Clark of New York, to be United States District Judge for the Southern District of New York, signed by 17 senators.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the